Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I'm going to create some Essential Holiday Collection cards using the Essential Holiday Collection from Lisa Horton Crafts and Spellbinders. I absolutely love the uniqueness of this collection. We have some ornament dies as well as some tags, and there's a few different sizes of tags in there, and then some press plates to go with those tags. These are perfect for adding just little elements to them, just little sentiments or elements on the edges of the corner. Then the nested tree frames and some holiday background press plates. Now these are smaller. Two of them will fit on an A2 piece of cardstock, so they're perfect for those tags and for smaller elements. And then we have festive circle sentiments, so those have press plates in them as well as some dies to cut it out. Now, first thing I'm going to do is use the holiday background panels, and I'm going to foil a bunch of different panels in both the Aura and the Prism foil. I absolutely love both of these. They're silver and gold, but they have a holographic shine to them, and I love that holographic shine. So I'm doing two of the holiday background panels at a time, using either the Prism or the Aura foil, and then hammer mill cardstock. And when I'm using my glimmer machine, I press the timer button. When that timer button stops flashing, I put it through my Spellbinders Platinum 6 machine. So we have some beautiful holiday panels there. I'm going to use that solid foil. Once I've done all of my sentiments and the backgrounds that I want, I'm going to foil the solid piece as well at the same time. I'm going to use some of them in these cards as well. So I'm doing lots of different backgrounds here. Basically, each one of those holiday background panels I'm going to do in the Aura and the Glimmer and then the solid. So we're going to have a lot of choice here. Now, a funny thing happened when I did that second background there with the Aura foil, the gold, is my foil shifted just on that star background, but not the other one. So the stars have 2 points to them, which actually looked really, really cool. And I wasn't expecting it all. And it was weird that it shifted on just that one, but not the other background. So after that, before that, I was putting it through my machine front ways and back ways, and that's what caused that. And after that, I just put it through one way and not putting it backwards again, just to avoid anything possibly shifting. But I absolutely love the uniqueness of these different background panels. Interesting to have them a little bit smaller than a whole background, so it makes you get a little bit creative with them. So once I have all of those backgrounds that I wanted done, I'm using the Festive Circle sentiments, and I'm going to do one in Prism foil, one in Aura foil, and then I'm going to use the solids and do some solid hot foiling. So with that Aura one, I did get a little bit of over foiling, but I'll share with you in a little bit how to get rid of it. So here's my solid hot foil plate, and it's really easy to do the solid hot foiling. You just need that solid hot foil plate. Put the foil pretty side against that solid plate, and then use the same hammer mill cardstock. Press that timer button, and once that timer button goes off, you can put it through your die cutting machine for that pressure. You need both the heat and the pressure to do the hot foiling. So there is a little cellophane cover to it, so you want to make sure to take that off. And I didn't show the entire process for all of the solid hot foiling because it's very repetitive and it's exactly the same for the whole thing. So I love having all of these choices of backgrounds as well as sentiments. Now, when taking off that overfoiling, sometimes I'll just use a soft brush or a foam brush. For these, it didn't really work too well. So the next way I like to get rid of it is using a piece of Best Ever Craft tape. I will press it onto a t-shirt or something like that a few times just to get some of the sticky out. I find that if you don't get enough of that sticky out, sometimes you can rip the cardstock that you're trying to take off the overfoiling. So by putting it on my shirt, I just took that excess sticky out and just kind of avoided that. Even with that, I'm being careful and trying to take it off slowly. I'm not being quick about it because I want to have control. And you can see by looking at the back of my tape there, I'm getting a lot of that overfoiling. So these sentiments will all be perfect for being used. Now, because there was overfoiling, my solid piece from this background most of those sentiments can't really be used. There's one that didn't overfoil, so that one could be easily used. I still cut them out. Often for foiled things that can't be used, I will either use that background to die cut some small die cuts when I'm creating, or else I can use that silhouette or that piece to glue under another sentiment just to add a little bit of extra dimension, so it doesn't really go to waste. There is a die with that Festive Circle Sentiments die set, so we can die cut these sentiments really, really easily. And for the once you've done the die cutting, you actually get that rectangle with those 6 circles cut out of it. So you can use that in your cards making as well. I don't use it in this video, but I am saving them for possible future projects. But it's a really cute element that I think would be neat and unique on the front of a card. So with all of my foiled pieces done and ready to go, I'm ready to start card making. So I'm going to use some of the Lisa Horton Crafts limited edition sets. This is the metallic set here. These are currently sold out, but I know that they have been on order and are expected at both Spellbinders and scrapbook.com about the middle of the month. So you'll find the links to them in the description below. And for scrapbook.com, you can actually ask them to notify you when they come back into stock. So that's really cool. I absolutely love these metallics. They are such juicy pads and the metallic colors are absolutely beautiful. So I am going around the edges of here with this solid gold. I don't need to go around the center part of it because it's going to be covered with another panel anyways, so there's no point in wasting that ink. Once I have my piece here that is inked all dried, I can glue that down to my card. I'm using Barely Art glue with a fine tip bottle. It makes it perfect for going around the edges of this little scallop with the holes cut into it, because I can put little tiny dots of that glue there. So I'm centering that on the front of the card. Between gluing different things down, I like to put down a large acrylic block. It just holds everything down nice and flat, keeps my hands free for working on other things. For the tree here, I'm using the Nested Tree Frames die set. I took several of those foiled panels and cut out the pieces of the tree. I didn't use all the same panels. I used different ones. I used some of the solid ones and some of the not solid ones, just for something a little bit unique and interesting. And I thought it would look really nice with that gold scalloped rectangle on the front of my card. There's also a little tiny star there that you can glue on. And for this particular card, I am using the trim. So I have that die cut out of some dark red cardstock. It's the same color that I die cut the mat on the front of my card. I'm gluing that down onto the tree, and each one of, when you die cut these trims, you get 3 of them, 1 for each layer of that tree. And I love the fact that this tree isn't symmetrical and it has a really unique look to it. It makes it perfect for this use. Now I'm doing this on the front of the card, but you could easily use the essential tag dies that I'll be using later in this video and use this tree as a decoration on the front of that tag. And I will be doing that with a tree as well. And I love the fact that you can kind of mix and match all these things. You can use them to create tags, or you can use them to create different trees. So to give a little bit of dimension here, as well as more sparkle, I'm using the Aura AB Gems pack here. And I use a die pick to kind of pierce into the adhesive behind it, press into it and place it where I want it to go, and then I can use my other finger to press it onto the card and make sure that adhesive has some good contact there. This Essential Gems pack has different sizes. There's 4 different sizes to it. So I will use a bigger size on the bottom of the tree and a smaller size on the top of the tree, just to kind of give it a little bit of perspective, as well as the fact that the larger gems look a little bit odd on the top of the tree as well. For a bit of snow, I'm just using a bit of stickles underneath the tree here. You could use the die cut that is in that pack. There is a die cut that does snow. I wanted to do a couple different ones. So for this one, I'm just using a little bit of stickles. It's just a tiny little bit more subtle. I'm also using those stickles for snowflakes in the sky. For my next tree, I'm going to be using some glitter cardstock that was cut out of that for that snow. Then I'm going to take one of the Festive Circle sentiments and I'm going to glue it into the bottom right corner for this card. For the next one, I'm going to glue it into the bottom center. So you can really pick and choose where that sentiment goes. So the next card, I'm going to do a tree as well, but I wanted to use the Festive Fur Interference ink. This is another one that's from the limited edition set. So there is 3 different limited edition sets. One is metallics, one is interference inks, and one is Cloud9 matte blending inks. So here I'm using the green one from the interference inks. And in order to get mattes that coordinate with my die cut element, I'm using my pad to swipe it on the edge of the card here. Now, I'm actually wasting a ton of ink there, and what I should have done was taken that ink and used it to ink blend on these die cut trees, just so that that ink didn't go to waste. But because I was videotaping, I needed that area to be able to videotape. So it did go to waste. If I were crafting on my own, I would have used it a little bit more efficiently. So I put a little bit of black soot distress ink on the bottom of the tree, and then I ink blended that Festive Fur ink on there. So that way I'm going to see both sides of that interference pad. Now, if you've never used interference pads before, they're kind of 2 pads in one. They're going to show up one color on light cardstock and one color on dark cardstock. Now, that Festive Fur is a tiny little bit different because both show greens. However, the color of green or the tone of greens are a little bit different. For black cardstock, it's a little bit more of a goldy green, and for white cardstock, it's a little bit more of a bright emerald. But even on white cardstock, you still see some of that shimmer. Now, I originally was going to do an embossed background for this card, and I still wanted to show this so you could see what it looked like. In the end, I didn't like the look of it, so I chose not to use it. But to emboss your dies, you just tape them to your cardstock, and then you run it through your die cutting machine with the layers for embossing a die cut, and then you can emboss the impression of your die. So if you want something to give it, or want to give it a little bit of a different look, this is another option. Like I said, I don't do it for this card because in the end, I just didn't like the way it looked. It didn't have the look that I was hoping for. So I went and die cut that with some white cardstock and then used the silver pad to ink blend around the edges. And once again, I don't need to ink blend the center because there is a layer going on top of this. So I have a brush for each one of these metallic pads, so I'm not mixing them with the brushes. And I just took a label maker and I put a label on each one of them so I know which one or which brush is for which. With all of my layers done and dried, I can glue that to the front of my card. I added a little bit more ink to this piece here simply because I was using the die cut rather than my embossed cardstock that I had originally planned to do. So I'm going to glue down this nested tree frame rectangle onto that piece that has the interference pad on it. And like I said, you get more of an emerald color with this, but you can see when you tilt it in the light, there's a little bit of a light green gold shimmer to it. So it's really beautiful. And I love showing off both colors, both the color that it shows up on the light cardstock as well as the dark. For the centerpiece, I chose one of those background panels, the one with the snowflake. I thought that would be really nice to go behind the tree. Glued that onto my black mat, and now I'm just going to assemble my tree while my card base is drying a little bit. So I'm going to glue down those layers, and for everything I'm using that same Barely Art glue. This cardstock here for my tree is just plain cardstock. I chose not to use the foil for this one, but you certainly could if you wanted to add a little bit more pattern. I chose not to just because I wanted to show a different version of this tree. I wanted to show it with just different cardstocks. Now I used white cardstock and ink blended it to make it green. You could die cut it with green cardstock as well. For this one, I'm using some white glitter paper for the trim on the tree or for the snow on the tree. This is another option with this die set. So you can either use the trim or the garland, or you could use the snow. Then I'm going to glue down the little star on the top. I'll let that dry for a few moments, and then I'm going to glue down the trunk to the tree. So originally I wasn't going to put the trunk there, but it looked a little bit odd. And because this tree is asymmetrical, it would have looked a little bit weird to have the snow just below the tree. It needed that trunk to it. So now I'm gluing down those bases or the snow to it, and that's also the white glitter paper. And for this particular one, I'm using some silver gems to do the ornaments on the tree. So once again, this comes in different sizes. So I'm using the smaller ones at the top of the tree, and this silver gem mix has 2 different types of silver gems. One is a little bit more kind of crystal-like and see-through, and one is a little bit more opaque. It's not matte because it has some gloss to it, but it's more of an opaque silver. It just has a different finish. And I like the fact that you can pick and choose which one is going to suit your project best. I'm using the same method with the die pick in order to put them on. I find this a lot easier than, say, trying to use a pair of tweezers. For this card, I'm going to pick my sentiment and then I'm going to glue it to the bottom center of the card. And you can pick and choose whether you want a solid hot foiled one or whether you want a regular one. It's really personal preference. I chose to use a regular one and then just use that silver pad and kind of roll my die cut in there just to give it a bit more of a heavier silver edge to it, and then glued it to the base of the card, or the card's background of the card. So that card is done and we are ready to go on to one created with the ornaments. So I'm using the Festive Ornaments die set here. I have several different ornaments die cut out of those foiled cardstocks. Now this ornament die set has a few different ones to choose from that you can do patterns on the ornaments. Because I'm choosing foiled cardstock, I just chose to use the solid circle with this, but you could easily add pattern with the dies that are included in the set. For the ink blending on the mat, I'm using the Crimson Cheer interference pad. This one shows up red on white cardstock, and then on black cardstock it has a green interference. So on this white, even though you see red, when you tilt it in the light, you see a little bit of that green shimmer, which is really, really pretty. It's not, it's very subtle. It's not like in your face shimmer, but it's absolutely gorgeous. For doing the ink blending on my ornaments, I'm using Jingleberry and Merry Mistletoe Cloud 9 interference, or Cloud 9 just matte blending pads. These ones, they kind of act a little bit like an oxide. They have a tiny bit of pigment in them, but they are mostly dye. Even though I am ink blending over top of foil, you still see the foil through that. But what I'm going to do once I have everything ink blended, I'm taking a dry cloth and I'm just kind of buffing it. That's taking any haze that ink might leave on that foil and removing it. And you could also use a piece of paper towel to do this as well. Now I have ink blending brushes that I only use with oxide inks or these matte blending inks because there's a tiny little bit of pigment in there. So you definitely don't want to use your dye-based brushes or the brushes you use for dye-based inks with these pads. So I wanted to add my sentiment to one of those ornaments. So once everything was ink blended, I just glued it right to the front of it, set that aside to dry. For my rectangle here, I'm going to use that same solid gold and ink blend around this. And again, I have a piece that's going to go on top of it, so it doesn't need to be the entire piece that is ink blended. Now originally what I wanted to do was do gold around the edge and then kind of blend it or fade it to nothing. But this ink pad is so juicy, it made it really difficult to do that. So I ended up choosing to do an extra layer on the front of this. And these layers that I'm using to go on the front of this nested tree frame set are from that same die set, and they have a really pretty stitched edge around them. So it's a really nice detail on there. With all of my ink blended pieces dried, I can start to assemble my card. I'm just using white A2 card bases for all of the cards that I'm creating here. It suits the card or suits the die cuts, and because there are white space on most of them, it blends in perfectly with that. So I do make these pieces a little bit smaller so that you can see that card base as well as a frame. Then I'm gluing down my nested frame here, and then the layer that goes on top of it. Putting that acrylic block on top of those layers while they're drying, just to hold them down. So one thing I like to do when I have that acrylic block on there holding things in place is I like to kind of figure out my layout. Because I can see it right on the background of the card, it makes it perfect for seeing whether the layout or the design that you had planned is going to work for what you're thinking. So in my medium craft stacks to the right, you can see that I have some die cuts in there. So I die cut some of the holly from this die set, as well as the berries and the ornament toppers. There is also a little chain. Now, in order to have those golds match, I die cut the chain as well as the ornament toppers out of areas from my foiled backgrounds. So the chains work perfectly all around the outside edges, and then there's some areas that are a little bit more solid, so I just used those pieces that I wasn't going to use for other cards to die cut my ornament tops. So that's one way that you can make everything match really well. And I love using those in that way just because it utilizes it just a little bit more. So once I have figured out exactly where my ornaments are going to go, I can start gluing them down. So I like to have that one with the sentiment kind of close to the front as well as towards the bottom. So I'll have the other ones behind it. Glue them down, and then I'm going to glue down the little chain pieces. Now I tried to make sure that when placing that ornament, that the longest part or the lowest ornament was going to work with the length of the chain. So that's one of the reasons why it's not too far down. If you wanted it to be a little bit lower, you could always connect a couple of them together to make it look like it was one. The other pieces are going to have shorter pieces of chain, so that can be cut off, but I'm going to glue them down first. I'm only gluing on the white piece of cardstock. Then I can cut off the excess with some scissors once that glue has set a little bit. Now, one thing that I hadn't thought of when I glued down that chain was putting this holly and berries on that ornament that's supposed to be in the back. So I am lifting it up a little bit to get those down to make sure that my chain hadn't started or hadn't set, the glue hadn't set on it before putting those pieces in there. And then I can put it on the other ones because I don't have to worry about tucking it behind anything. Once again, using that same Barely Art glue for all of these. Now, I chose not to do any ink blending on these holly pieces, but you certainly could. And I chose the colors based on the colors of the ink. I wanted those hollies to show up, but I also wanted them to coordinate with the ink colors that were used to ink blend those ornaments. Now, I chose 3 ornaments here. You could easily do a design with just 1 ornament on it, and that set has several different options to use, so you can get creative with it. So the last things I'm going to do in this video are some tags. So I'm using that Essential Nested Tags die set. For my first couple tags, I'm going to be decorating them with different die cuts. So first one, I'm going to use that nested tree, and I'm using a little bit of black distress ink around the edges because I want to use the Yuletide Sky interference pad. This is the 3rd one from that Interference Ink limited edition set, and I'm going to ink blend the background with it. So this has a blue color, but the color that shows up on the black is more of like a purple periwinkle color. So I'm going to ink blend that on the background there, let that totally dry. I also want to use this color on my second tag, which is one of the ones that was die cut out of the stars background panel. And once again, the foil is going to resist the ink, but if you get a little bit of ink residue on that foil, you can just use a dry cloth and just rub it off. The pieces for my tree were the polka dot foiled background cut into the different pieces for that tree, and I used the Festive fur interference pad in order to color it. And as you could see, when I did my black ink blending on the background of the tag, I did a tiny little bit of black on the bottom of each one of these tree pieces as well, just to show off the different colors and give it a little bit of shading. Once I have those pieces glued on top of each other, I can glue them to my tag. I'm putting this tree a little bit higher because I want to put my sentiment towards the bottom, putting in the little trunk to that tree, and then also adding the star to the top. Now this star is really, really tiny, so it was perfect for die cutting out of some of those foiled backgrounds. So the star, just like the ornament toppers, I just die cut them out of the edges from those foiled backgrounds, and most of the edges were from the solid foiled backgrounds. So don't think that you have to get rid of some of those foiled pieces. They work perfectly in the place of specialty cardstocks. For my sentiment, I'm using one of the sentiments from the Essential Tag Accessories pressure or press plate set. This set has a bunch of little pieces that you can use with that are perfect for tags, and I'm just using the sentiment for this one, but I'm going to use more of the pieces from them in my next couple of tags. So put it on the base of my Better Press system, just use the Better Press ink to ink it up, and then I put it on a scrap of cardstock, which was taped to the clear plate, put those 2 pieces together, and then ran it through my Spellbinders Platinum 6 machine. Then I'm using my trimmer to trim that down as thin as possible. What I often do when I'm trying to trim them down nice and thin is I will look for the edges of the letters on the right side of that clear plate on my trimmer. And often for myself, that's enough width or enough space out outside of those letters. So I get it as thin as I want it. You can do it even closer if you want, but I always worry that I'm going to cut a little bit of the edge of those letters off. There is a circle die to die cut a circle out of the top of the tag, as well as a few different accessories to use with it. I chose to use my Crop-A-Dial simply because I didn't want to have to tape to the front of this tag, and I should have done it ahead of time. Because I have the ink on the background, the ink probably isn't completely dry and the tape doesn't like to stick to that. So if you want to die cut the circle out of that, I suggest doing that before doing anything to the front of your tag. For the next tag, I'm using one of the Festive Circle Sentiments, and I'm ink blending it with the Crimson Sheer Interference pad to get a nice bright red on there. I will use the dry cloth to get off the excess that might be left on top of my foiling. And one of the reasons for doing this is not only to have your foiling shine through, but if you have any ink on top of that foiling, it doesn't dry. So, and I've done this before, so when you're touching it to assemble your tag or whatnot, often you'll get a little bit of ink on your fingers and possibly smudge it elsewhere on your project. So it's a good habit to get into, just using the dry cloth on there just to make sure there's no wet ink on there. Once I have that glued down to my tag, I also glue down the chain as well as the ornament topper, and then gluing down the holly and the berries. Now, the holly and the berries, I did use the Crimson Sheer as well as the Festive Fur interference pads on them, just to add a little bit of that iridescent shimmer. On this one, I used the star foiled background. You can use whichever foiled background you want, or even you could use a solid background with a colored cardstock or one of the solid foil pieces. You can really just do whatever background you want, and that ornament really pops off the top. Once again, I just used some cord for hanging the tag or tie the tag, and used my Crop-A-Dial in order to cut the circle. For my next tag, I'm going to use some more pieces from the Essential Tag Accessories press plate. Now I taped my tag on the top right corner on my press plate or the clear plate, so that when I flip it over onto the base of the press plate, the corner of that tag is going to be on the top left corner. Now, one thing that I like to do is the piece that I die cut my tag out of, I keep that as a guide. So when I'm trying to figure out how to place things on the tag, because that tag is a lot smaller, I can use that guide and lay it where I need it to go on the press plate base, or better press base, and I know exactly what my layout is going to look like, know what my placement is going to be. For this one, I'm using the Festive Fur interference pad, but because I want to show off the two looks that you can get with it, or the two colors you can get with it, I did some ink blending with the black one first. I put some of that black soot distress ink on the bottom corner, and then used a brush to kind of remove any harsh lines to kind of blend it out a little bit. Ran it through my die cutting machine, and now I'm doing a second layer with that Festive Fur interference pad. Because that plate hasn't moved at all, it's going to press exactly where the first one did. So I'm going to get a two-tone pressing with this. Now, after that is done, I can take that off and then put my sentiment on. I chose to do my sentiment at a different time because I didn't want a chance getting ink all over my background with that Festive Fur, as well as the fact that I wanted to do this with the black Better Press ink. And I figured I was just going to have a little bit more control if I did the pine needle piece different or at a separate time from my sentiment. But I still use the guide or the piece of cardstock that I die cut my tag out of in order to make sure that the placement was where I wanted it to be. While I have my Better Press out, I'm going to do the pressing on my next tag, and then I'll put it away and finish off those tags. So I'm going to use the holly from the Essential Tag Accessories plus press plate set. I'm going to use it with a new Better Press ink set. It's called Woodlands, and I'm going to use the pine color. This one's a perfect green for that holly. So, and I was excited to use a new color. So that's the set there. It has a few different greens as well as a brown. the name Woodlands is absolutely perfect for it. So it's going to work perfectly for doing this holly. I chose the spruce one. I have that one off to the side as well, but I ended up not using that. Originally, I was thinking I was going to do two-tone just like I did with the last one, but I ended up just doing one pressing, and I just liked it just with the one color to it. So I left it at that. Now I am going to take the tag off the clear plate here because at this point I wasn't sure exactly which sentiment I wanted to use with it. What I end up doing is putting it right back onto the clear plate, and then I'm going to use the Do Not Open Till the 25th press plate from this set. I'm going to use Versamark ink with it, and then I'm going to heat emboss it with gold embossing powder. So I have that holly image in the corner, and then the gold embossed Do Not Open Till the 25th in the center of this tag. So I'll tape that right back onto the clear plate, and you can see I used my guide to make sure that this sentiment was going to be centered on my tag. Then I'm using that Versamark ink, putting the clear plate on the base, and then running it through my die cutting machine to press that image or sentiment in place. Then I'm going to use some superfine gold embossing powder, and I will heat that in place. And I love the fact that with that gold embossing powder, you also get that raised image of it. If you don't necessarily want the raised image of it, you could also use just the gold ink that I've been using on my backgrounds. But I really love the look of the raised gold embossing. Then I take my holly, and I'm actually going to use some of the interference pads to watercolor my holly images. Now, this tag is just die cut out of hammer mill cardstock. It's not really intended for watercoloring, so it doesn't watercolor like it would if I was using watercolor cardstock. If you know that you're going to do watercoloring ahead of time, I highly suggest using watercolor cardstock. I hadn't really decided which technique I wanted to do to fill in my holly. It was kind of an afterthought. Once I had my sentiment embossed on there, I thought that it would look nice to have those colors on my tag, as well as the fact that that tag would coordinate with the other cards that I've done in this video. But if you look closely, you can see that the ink doesn't react quite as well. It doesn't flow quite as well as it would on watercolor cardstock. It still looks fine in the end. I was worried about the cardstock bubbling up because that's often what happens when you watercolor on cardstock that is not intended for water, but it actually didn't work too bad simply because the areas that I'm doing it on are really quite tiny. And it's just that bottom corner of that tag. But again, if you know you're going to do watercoloring ahead of time, it's a really good idea to use watercolor cardstock or even mixed media cardstock because that can handle some of that moisture. With those holly watercolored and dried, I'm just doing some light ink blending on the top left corner of both of the tags. I don't want to completely cover them with this crimson sheer, or this one anyways. I'm going to do the other one with the Festive Fur, but I want to tie in the red from the berries somewhere else on the tag, and that top left corner looked a little bit blank. So I'm heavier on the edges with that color and then ink blend it to be a little bit lighter. For the second one, I'm doing the same thing, but using the Festive Fur pad. It's going to coordinate beautifully with the pine needles in the bottom right corner. And by having that white around there, I'm not using that color and completely ink blending out my pine needles. These tags I kept very, very simple. Again, you can get a little bit more complicated with them if you want to. One thing that I think I would change for next time is my sentiment on the pine needles one. I think it would have looked nice if it was embossed with white powder before doing that ink blending because it would show up a little bit more. But at the time when I was creating it, I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do with the rest of the tag. But it's, again, one of those things that as you're creating, sometimes your ideas change or sometimes you're trying to figure out as you're going along. So there is the two final tags for that one, and here is the ones with the die cuts to them. I absolutely love all the interference ink on them because it just gives it a beautiful shimmer that's perfect for holiday cards. And that metallic ink as well, the solid gold as well as the silver pot, do the same thing as well. I really love the uniqueness of this collection, as well as the fact that all of the limited edition ink pads that I used coordinate together so beautifully. I've kind of mixed and matched them throughout the different cards in this, and I wasn't sure how The red from the matte blending ink would look with the crimson red from the interference ink, and same with the greens. But I really love that they look look nice together, and they coordinate beautifully and just have different finishes to them. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me, and I hope you have a fantastic day.